Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it. Henry, the usual for you today, the waiter asked politely, holding a notebook and pen at the ready. Yes, Andy, the customer answered, and out of habit he flipped through the menu some more. Today, Henry looked a little depressed and sad. That's why Andy always tried to make sure that guests left the restaurant only in good spirits, tried to be as delicate as possible. Is there anything else you want? He asked cautiously. Can I offer you our signature dessert or a dish from the chef in the kitchen? They say his steaks with cranberry sauce are excellent. Henry looked at the young waiter, and in his eyes he read an undisguised longing. You know, why don't you bring me that steak of yours? Suddenly the guest waved his fist on the table and added 50 grams of cognac to it. Andy, it's nice to have a drink today. 15 years we lived together soul to soul. I thought we were in love, not like others. She's not with me for the money, even though she's 10 years younger. And then, you see, it turned out that she had a young lover for half a year already. She left me for some simpleton. That's it, Andy. Get me a cognac. Andy sympathized with the man and rushed to the kitchen to fill the order. He felt sincerely sorry for Henry. The businessman had been a regular diner at their restaurant for 2 years and always tried to tell the waiters how he was doing, despite the fact that the other employees were greatly annoyed by his behavior. Andy, on the contrary, was completely calm towards Henry. The guy in general tried to show maximum sympathy towards their guests. He knew how to adapt to the mood of each of them, and more than once they praised him not only for his prompt and quality service, but also for his remarkable tact. And Andy did all this not for big tips, as some of his unscrupulous colleagues were sincerely convinced. Andy's ability to make timely and appropriate jokes, or to be extra attentive where necessary, all seemed to come naturally to him. He really liked his job, and he never complained, no matter how hard it was at times. And that would have been all right. Yeah, there was just one thing that always soured the 25-year-old waiter's mood. It was the attitude of the director of the very restaurant where Andy worked. John Wilson turned out to be the most cunning and dodgy man the waiter had ever met in his life. It was as if on some deep level he hated Andy, and at every opportunity he showed him his dislike or nagged him about some insignificant little thing, just to show him his place. Recriminations and humiliations were constant companions of Andy whenever he caught John's eye. The boy himself had no idea why he had been treated this way, but he tried to be as discreet as possible and never interrupted the headmaster. Today, he had to take his guests, his steak and cognac. Wilson jumped out of the ground in front of him and grabbed the boy by the elbow and dragged him roughly to the bar, where he began to cry out. What do you think you're doing? Do you want to go back outside? But I can make that happen in no time. You know me. John, I don't understand what I did. I was just doing my job serving the guests. Why didn't you bring it straight to my office? The director hissed like a snake. Probably wanted to pocket all the money. Forgot that we have an unspoken rule here. First share with the boss, then pick up the change for yourself. I can't hear the answer. Andy struggled to contain his own anger and resentment. Wilson seemed to be watching his every move, as if he were waiting for an excuse to fire him. Of course I remember that, Andy tried to say as calmly as possible. I just didn't have time to get the full amount to you. I thought I'd serve a few more guests, and then the tip would be enough. So I wouldn't have to run to you 100 times to distract you from important business. John's face wrinkled in response. He swallowed a spoonful of sour cranberries and then held out his right hand with a mute demand that you spill everything you could get your hands on. He bellowed quickly, and his eyebrows rose so high they made him look like a bird of prey. Andy sighed, giving him all the money he'd made that morning. He got most of it from Henry, who really liked their trademark style. The boy hoped that he could use the money to buy groceries at home tonight. But apparently, that was not to be. And don't look at me so insolently, said the director. Then he didn't hesitate to count them. I pay you too much for all the idle chit-chat you make with your guests every time. What is your job? The man looked at Yura questioningly. Make each of them happy. The boy said hesitantly and added, make sure each of them comes back here at least once more. Wilson laughed out loud and looked at the guy like he was an idiot. Fetch and serve. That's your job, and that's all there is to it. But instead, you are ready to get into the soul of every guest just to get more money from the tip for your beloved. Andy lowered his eyes sadly. No matter how much he tried to convince the director that money was not the main reason he worked here, it was to no avail. The other waiters looked at the boy with understanding eyes. Wilson was always taking tips from them too, or taking almost all of them, leaving the young men with mere pennies. Not surprisingly, this caused a lot of unresolved problems in the restaurant. But the greedy director was not in the least embarrassed by this state of affairs. You've got to work better, run more carefully. Tortured the waiters, Wilson, and you're flying around the hall like sleepy flies. You think I don't see anything on my cameras. If you worked hard enough, you'd get full pay. You ain't got no fines to pay. You bums. Eventually, everyone got tired of fighting against the arbitrariness of their boss. And for many people, the best way out was to quit rather than continue to tolerate such disrespect. And yet, it was Andy who got the most kicks, having to silently endure the temper of the director for the sake of a small but relatively stable salary. He came home that night very upset. His girlfriend Bella, who had recently turned 23 herself, petted her beloved boy. What? Is that turkey bothering you again? She asked, referring to the warden. Maybe we should write an anonymous complaint against him. Have him checked. Andy kissed her tenderly and shook his head negatively. You can't, my good man. If it closes, I'll have to look for a new job. And I don't have much experience yet. There's no guarantee I'll get the same job again. He pulled Bella against him with pleasure and inhaled the fresh scent of her incredibly thick, dark brown hair. It's okay, honey. We'll get through this. Bella smiled at him happily. And I didn't come empty-handed today. Look how much money I made. With these words, the girl lightly flew to her purse and, taking out her purse, proudly showed her fiancé its contents. The boy exhaled and slowly ran his fingers through several large bills. Whom did you tell fortune for so fortunate? Bella waved her luxurious hair and pretended to peer into the future. A businessman wanted to make a fortune on his daughter, whether or not she would marry the son of his longtime business partner. So I looked at her hand. So what was in there? Andy asked with interest. Everything will be all right between them. The girl waved her hand. It turns out that she had been in love with him for many years, and he only now paid attention to her, but they were destined to be together. And this marriage will bring joy to both, so the richer man was generous, especially since his daughter was absolutely delighted and even invited me to her wedding. You're my little one, Andy exclaimed and picked up the bride in his arms. I promise you, once we're on our feet, we'll have a wedding that will be talked about for another 6 months. Sadness flashed in the girl's bright green eyes. What is it? The young man frowned. There's nothing, Bella answered grudgingly. And then she looked sadly at her lover. I'm sorry your father won't be at our wedding. It's no good, though. I still blame myself for all the quarrels you had with him because of me. And your mother. When I think of her eyes, I get a cold sweat. They hate me, Andy. But how can I live with that? Andy gently took the girl by the chin and looked intently into her eyes. Remember, Bella, you're not to blame for anything. They made their own choice, refusing to accept my love for you. If I had agreed to go along with them, I would never have been as happy as I am with you now. The guy wiped the pads of his thumb, tiny tears sliding down his sweetheart's cheek, and then leaned over and kissed her again. The bride and groom kept one big secret they had just recently. It was that Andy was a simple waiter at a restaurant in the capital, and in fact was the son of very wealthy parents. Frank and Vanessa Miller were major figures in the publishing business. They owned the rights to most of the national print newspapers and magazines, and the couple, of course, were very proud of it. Frank dreamed of putting the management of such a large-scale and serious business in the hands of his son, promising him a luxurious life abroad and a business that he would burn every day. However, his father's grandiose plans were not destined to come true for the simple reason that Andy had met Bella and was ready to give up literally everything for the sake of this girl. "You're out of your mind," the businessman said, when he found out he was going to introduce him to his future bride. No. This street charlatan will never set foot in my house." "Father, you forget that this is also my home," Andy said coldly. "Bella is a very kind and decent girl. She's not even a charlatan, though she has a real gift. She can see a person's future by the line on his palm." Frank just grabbed his head. "How did she mess with your head, son?" "She's a charlatan. Where would a Christian person get that kind of damnation? She could hypnotize you. You don't know at all what you're doing to me and your mother," Frank said, fumbling with his heart. The man slowly sat down in the big leather chair. "Andy, honey, the mother tried to use sweet talk and flattery to get close to her son. You understand us too. Dad and I dreamed of seeing a beautiful, educated girl from our circle next to you, but not, God forbid, some beggar." Andy only covered his eyes and rubbed the bridge of his nose, as if he were trying to erase something very heavy and gloomy from his mind. Finally he spoke. "Mama Bella is not a beggar. She just reads palms for a living, you know. If it wasn't considered cheating by most people, she might as well rent a medical office at some clinic and work there as well as any average psychologist or psychiatrist." "And while we're at it, Dad," the boy said in a firm voice, turning to his father, "Bella was taught to read the hand by her grandmother. She was Russian, had raised the girl all her life, as long as her health permitted. She had just recently died, and Bella was left alone." Oh, what am I supposed to do now? Should I pity her?" My father rushed in again. "And who the hell was that grandmother? How did you even meet her? I bet she came up to you and asked you to hold her hand, and you fell for it. Romantic." The veins in Andy's face swelled, appearing and disappearing as he forcefully brought his fist down on the coffee table. Vanessa cried out loudly, and her father cursed indignantly. "Don't you ever talk about my fiancée with such disdain," Andy exclaimed. "Bella is the purest and most innocent creature I have ever known. You have no idea what a soul she has, Lord. She'll make a first-class wife. Not like your Monica the last time you asked me to marry her." Andy did not tell his parents that he had met Bella at the amusement park, where he had gone into the fortune, telling Booth where his bride-to-be was sitting, ready to give fortune, telling to anyone for a nominal fee. The businessman's son understood that his father was now ready to jump at any excuse to make her look bad in front of him. "What's wrong with Monica?" my mother asked timidly. "She's a beautiful girl. She just got back from England last year." Andy looked at his mother with frank skepticism. "She came back, but what was she doing there that you didn't bother to ask her?" Andy asked. "She said she had finished her studies at some prestigious university," my mother replied, and looked at her husband helplessly. Frank just shrugged. "How should I know what your women's business is?" Andy grinned bitterly and shook his head. "She didn't lie to you about that," the guy answered her. "Except that I heard her talking to her girlfriend and bragging that she was able to have so many affairs that she now has a fiancé in almost every city in the country, waiting for her." Vanessa just threw up her hands. I didn't know what to say to that. "After all, there's no point in cheating on your family. I don't need a wife like that," Andy said. "I fell in love with Bella from the first moment I saw her. I can't explain it to you. My heart just told me, this is your woman. I love her very much. So much, Mom, that every second we spend apart is torture for me. God's will. And you believe that? Frank tried to find support in his mother's face. He's got that Shakespearean drama on full blast. Doesn't anyone else see that but me? Am I the last sober person in this room? Vanessa, hesitating, approached her son. She put her hand on his chest and looked into his eyes with a belittling look. Andy, son, believe me, your father and I wish you nothing but happiness. But what you're talking about, it just doesn't make sense. Let's make a deal. You bring her to dinner, we'll look at her, and then we'll see. The son looked gratefully at his mother. Thanks, Mom. The boy squeezed her fingers. I'm sure you'll like it. As for my father, he just waved his hand. You can do whatever you want, but I'm not going to be a part of it. Nevertheless, he did go down to dinner to meet his son's fiancée. Unfortunately, the miracle never happened. Bella's overly plain clothes and modest, almost frightened demeanor only solidified his parents' suspicions about the girl's treacherous nature. Vanessa frankly disliked not the way Bella explained her thoughts, as she tried to explain to them how her gift worked, nor the bright, almost oriental beauty of the girl, due to the natural color of her hair and eyes. The rich people didn't realize that Bella was tanned because she worked outdoors every day, not because she had dark-skinned ancestors. Frank called his son's fiancée Esmeralda several times in conversation. It seemed like a joke, but at the same time there was something unpleasant and insulting about the name that counted well with the confident father's voice and facial expression. Andy himself was ashamed to be ashamed of himself, and as soon as dinner was over, he took the girl home in person, where he assured her at length that her parents had been out of sorts that day. Bella assured him that she was all right, though she was a bit sore at heart. She was well aware that her fiancé's parents didn't like her, and she also had a hunch that she would get him into trouble, and so it was. In the evening, a real scandal broke out between Andy and his parents, and it resulted in his son leaving home. He wasn't going to follow the silly traditions of high society and was determined to spend the rest of his life with the one he truly loved. All right, Andy, rubbed his hands together, Frank. Let's see how long you can go without money. You'll come crawling home in a jiffy begging your mother and me for forgiveness. The businessman immediately blocked all of his son's bank cards and also removed him from the family account. He hoped that his lack of money and hunger would bring some sense to his negligent heir, but he was not prepared for Andy's philosophical serenity in this action. Well done, father, Andy thought to himself, seeing the blank lines in the place of his bills. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to become even more independent of you. If you thought I could take care of myself, then so be it. Fortunately, Andy had managed to bring some cash with him, and they had rented an apartment in another neighborhood with it. Bella continued to earn money by fortune-telling, and Andy got a job as a waiter in the same restaurant. That's how they lived for a while, keeping their secret from all the new neighbors and acquaintances, why they needed the extra attention. The couple planned to get married in a year, once they had saved up enough money for a beautiful celebration worthy of both of them. Except, not even a couple of months later, Frank found out about his son's new job. To say he and Andy's mother were shocked was to say nothing. God, what a disgrace. He was tearing his hair out as a businessman, and my son was serving plates of food in a tavern. No, I will not leave it at that. If he doesn't understand in normal language, it's time to give it all up and go home. Then I'll have to resort to radical measures. What are you going to do, Frank? Asked her husband, a confused Vanessa. She couldn't imagine that her Andy, her golden boy, would stoop to working as a maid. The woman's heart was broken. The businessman, on the other hand, blushed with anger, tapped his index finger on the table, and answered his wife. That's all right. That's all right. Frank will make the little bastard sniff so much powder that he'll run away from his fortune. Tell her just like that, with his heels flashing and remembering his mommy and daddy on the way. That same day, he contacted the restaurant manager, the notorious Wilson, and arranged a meeting with him, offering the restaurateur a good reward. Frank warned, the most important thing is that you don't spare my son. Rip him off so that he comes home at the end of the day without legs, and pay him less, and give him the lowest rate. What about the tip? Wilson asked. and greed flashed in his eyes. The corners of the businessman's mouth slowly crept upward so that his face took on the most gloating of all expressions. You can keep everything as compensation for your daily pedagogical techniques, so to speak. I want my son to sink to the kind of bottom from which one either resurfaces by pushing back or sinks forever. If no one offers help, and it is in your interest to make his life in the restaurant so unbearable that he will reach exactly the second option as soon as possible. Wilson, though it was strange to hear the businessman say this, agreed when he heard that he would be paid a lot of money for it, and whatever else he was going to get. And the fact that they have their own games over there, the rich people, that's of no concern to him at all. And so it came to pass that Andy was, in fact, a victim of his own father's shenanigans. Of course, he couldn't imagine that his boss was acting at the behest of Frank Miller. But Wilson, who already had a long, rotten gut, only continued to take it out on the poor waiter, leaving him with virtually no paycheck at the end of the month. To get out of his miserable situation, the guy took part-time jobs, where he worked as a loader in a supermarket, where he worked as a courier. Through an app, he ran around the city. Because of this, Andy often came home very late. Sometimes even past midnight. The guy was not discouraged and believed that he and his fiancée would soon get on well. Bella was very worried, but there was nothing she could do. All day long she worked at fairs or offered her services through the internet. The girl kept a small blog dedicated to romance, and this way sometimes arranged for private appointments. She wasn't paid much, and was rarely lucky, as in the case of the rich man and his daughter. However, the money really helped the young family to stay afloat. On one of those evening shifts, as Andy was returning home in the dark, someone attacked him from behind, hitting him hard in the head with something blunt and very heavy. Bella waited for her fiancé until morning, and then Vanessa called her out of the blue. "Are you happy now?" the woman screamed into the phone. "She killed my boy, and she's walking on the ground. She's alive and well." Dumbfounded, Bella didn't immediately find something to answer. She only asked again in a trembling voice, "I'm sorry, Vanessa. I don't know what you mean. What about Andy?" "He never came home today." There was a long pause on the phone for a moment. Then the businessman's wife screamed, "There's no more Andy, you scumbag. He's dead. Some scumbag killed him because of you. You hear? Killed my son. Because of your witchcraft." Bella felt as if she couldn't take a single breath. The room slowly swirled before her eyes and then plunged into total darkness. Later, when the girl regained consciousness, she arrived at the rich man's house. The door was opened by the head of the family himself. Frank was dressed all in black and had no face on him. "What do you want?" he asked me rudely, apparently. "Not only did you send my son to the other side of the world, but now you want to kill me and my wife with your witchcraft." "So it's true?" Bella asked, looking pale. "Andy's dead? Are you deaf or what?" The businessman shouted at her. "I clearly told you to get out of here while you have all your bones intact. You'll burn in hell for what you did to our boy." The girl shook her head incomprehensibly. Frank's face twisted with hatred. If it hadn't been for propriety, he would have been more than willing to strangle her right there on the porch of his own house. "Wait a minute. Please explain to me why you think I'm responsible for Andy's death. I didn't know anything about it until this morning, when your wife called me and started insulting me in all kinds of ways." And the enraged businessman shoved the girl in the shoulder with all his strength, so that she barely managed to keep her feet, but more pain pierced through her and forced her to grab onto the decorative posts that supported the canopy. "And you look at yourself. What doesn't get to your chicken brain?" The rich man gave her a hateful look from head to toe. "You're the one who ruined the boy. You'll always be haunted by death for your tricks. I don't know who you've predicted and what you've predicted, but it looks like you've crossed his path with your evil predictions. And my son, suffered because of it." Bella looked at Andy's father with eyes full of horror and tears. She continued to stare at the man the whole time, smarting with her gaze. "Please," she asked, "let me at least look at him. Let me mourn him." Frank only laughed scornfully. "What do you think you are doing, cursing my friends and myself and my wife? I know you, demon spawn. You're all the same charlatans. If anything is not according to you, you are ready to take me to the third tribe to the grave. But I'm not a quack." In desperation, Bella shouted in the businessman's face, "Why are you so cruel? Don't you feel sorry for the memory of your son? He loved me, and I loved him and will always love him, you hear? Always love him, you hear, always." The fortune teller ran down the steps of the porch and hurried away from this sad place and these awful people. Frank's curses were coming her way. "If you try to come to the funeral, witch, I'll roll you alive in concrete, and that, love is eternal. Don't even think about our family. You weren't worthy of Andy's little finger, let alone her memory." The unhappy girl's heart was literally ready to burst into pieces. In one day, she had lost the person closest to her, and now, as it turned out, she did not even have the right to see him off. It seemed to Bella that her soul dried up in an instant, like the fragile wing of a butterfly. As the young fortune-teller was about to leave the cottage where the Millers lived, she suddenly felt ill. Her head suddenly felt dizzy, and a sour bile lump instantly rolled up to her throat. Clutching at her stomach, the girl bent sharply in half. She vomited no way, thought poor Bella, and looked fearfully at her reflection in a tiny pocket mirror she had found in her purse. The fortune-teller noticed how her eyes lit up with an emerald flame. "If this was your parting gift, Andy, thank you," said the girl, looking up into the clear blue sky. After a visit to the doctor, her hunch was confirmed. Bella was pregnant and carrying under her heart the child of her late fiancé. The term was very short, but by now the fortune-teller faced a difficult choice. Should she raise the child herself, or try to enlist the help of Andy's heartless relatives? After thinking it over, Bella discarded the second option. If they were treating her so badly now, was it worth hoping that the news of a grandchild or granddaughter would mollify them at least a little? Deciding to go it alone, Bella worked twice as hard to prepare for the birth and to buy everything she might need in the early days for her unborn child. In addition to fortune-telling, she also worked part-time as a cleaner and dishwasher in a small cafe. The young mother had no higher than average education, so she had to look only for the hardest and lowest paid jobs. Still, she managed to make ends meet. She did not complain and steadfastly endured all the difficulties that had fallen to her lot as a woman. In due time, Bella gave birth to a beautiful daughter whom she named Eva. The birth was very hard. The young woman suffered almost 12 hours before she was finally able to give her daughter life. It was then that the fortune-teller, she later thought, had undermined her already fragile health. But it was nothing compared to the fact that she was not alone again. She now had her own blood in her life, and at the same time, a piece of memory of her beautiful and beloved Andy. For the next 6 years, Bella and Eva lived in poverty, but they were incredibly friendly and loved each other. Eva grew up a true copy of her mother, as dark-haired and with her father's eyes. All these years, the fortune-teller worked as hard as she could. But no matter how great was the happiness of the appearance of her daughter in her life, in Bella's soul at the same time constantly nests sticky fear. All because, periodically, the young woman was very tormented by health problems. And when Eva turned 6, her mother completely fell ill. The fortune-teller's weak heart could not withstand all that physical labor, and there was no one at all to help the little family. The only thing that gave Bella some consolation, feeling her imminent end, was that she had managed to teach her daughter the basics of reading lines of destiny and taught her to determine a person's soul by a mere look in his eyes. Fortunately, her mother's phenomenal abilities were passed on to the faith, and the girl was grasping everything literally on the fly. Bella herself never looked into the palm of her daughter's hand. She did not want to see what was waiting for her own child. Maybe she was afraid, or maybe she thought she was misinterpreting. After all, blood relatives were always considered worse. That was how it was customary in their family. Her grandmother also said that she could not see her fate precisely because they were blood relatives. Anticipating her imminent death, the young woman called Eva over and gently squeezed her small hand in hers. "Eva, just remember one thing," the mother admonished the girl. "Never let anyone doubt your gift and never allow yourself to be belittled because of it. You are unique, and your gift, your ability to see the future, will be used only for good. Then your fate will be softened, even if sometimes it seems that everyone is against you." Bella felt her chest suddenly very heavy, and each breath was very difficult to take. "Mommy, don't go," Eva asked her pitifully. "Don't die, please." The daughter cried and slowly lowered her head onto her mother's hand. She poured hot, childlike tears over her mother's hand. "It's all right. Honey, don't be afraid. I guess my time has come," the mother said weakly, and turned away from her daughter. She could not bear to see her crying face. Eva, meanwhile, looked boldly at her dying mother and said loudly, "I don't need this gift. I don't need anything. I only want you to stay with me." Mom was out of her last strength, turning to her daughter. Her eyes were already covered by a death veil. "Don't you dare say that, Eva. This gift is a little that you will have of me after me." With great difficulty, Bella wrapped one arm around her daughter and kissed her soft, fluffy hair. The frail woman abruptly weakened and collapsed helplessly onto the white sheet. Eva looked into her mother's eyes. They saw nothing else. They saw nothing else. Her soul was carried as high as it could go, and she would never have to experience the pain of suffering again. "Mommy," Eva whispered, unable to face the obvious. "Mommy, don't go." "But why? Why did you decide to do it now, Mother?" Eva cried over her mother's body for a long time. She was unable to tear herself away from her, now so cold. Finally, when all the tears were cried out, Eva was able to call an ambulance, and then she went to ask the neighbors for help. After her mother's death, Eva ended up in an orphanage where the girl, to put it mildly, was not welcome. Her exotic appearance and ability to read her hand annoyed Jacqueline Jones terribly. The director of the orphanage seriously believed that the little girl was a real witch, and therefore nothing good could be expected of her. During her time at the orphanage, especially during the first year, Eva would often escape by climbing through the hole in the far side of the fence. She ran as fast as she could until she found herself in the town cemetery, where she unmistakably found her mother's grave each time. As she lowered herself onto the small cast iron bench, she let her tears well up. Only here could she let go of all her sad thoughts. "Mother, they don't love me," complained the daughter to the late Fortunatella. "Nobody likes me, especially Principal Jacqueline Jones. I heard her talking about me with some kindergarten teacher, saying, 'This little witch is going to lead all the kids astray, all bewitched.' What kind of true path is that? Mom, what have I done that she considers me an enemy?" The girl looked at the picture silently, as if waiting for an answer. But inside, Eva felt a complete emptiness. It was as if none of her questions had been answered. "I don't want to live in an orphanage," Eva said slowly. "They are all mean and don't want to be friends with me. I would rather follow you. Mother, I miss you." Eva fell on the grave and burst into bitter, hot tears. It was so hard for the little girl that she did not see for herself even the slightest hope for a brighter future. It seemed to her that it would have been better if she had died then. At least now she would be with her mother, close to her closest and dearest person. After this kind of escapades, Eva often got in trouble from both the teachers and the principal herself. She was not ashamed to make fun of the girl in public in order, as she thought, to knock this little witch all the arrogance. "What?" Eva again went to the cemetery to her mother Fortune. Teller asked the principal, to whom some of the boys have long denounced Eva, telling exactly where she sometimes escapes. "Look, if you've been doing any rituals in there, I'll punish you like this. I'll take a hard birch rod and beat the crap out of you. Jacqueline Jones. Why are you doing this to me? Eve asked, looking at her pitifully. Would you like me to tell you a couple of verses? Maybe I'll see a good husband for you. I'll tell you where to meet him. Principal swung at the girl. Don't you dare suggest that to me. And don't you dare suggest that to the boys. We are all decent believers here, and we will not tolerate the kind of heresy that you carry within the walls of our orphanage. Eva was locked in the storeroom or left without lunch, but she still quietly continued to tell fortunes to some of the older girls, and even to a couple of the friendliest of her caretakers. Once Eva stopped to talk to the local janitor, Grandpa Charlie, who jokingly suggested it. Eva, can you look me in the palm of your hand? Will they give me an apartment in the new house or not? I've been waiting for 3 years. They promised as usual, and they don't say a word. Of course, Uncle Charlie. Eva nodded. She looked at the lines intersecting the dense pattern on the old man's hand, and Eve felt sick to her stomach. Flames flickered in her eyes, and Eva could smell the pungent smell of burning and smoke in her nose. The worst part was that the fire she saw with her internal vision must have been Charlie's fault at their orphanage. Uncle Charlie, did Eva mumble weakly? I can't see the apartment, but I see something else entirely. What is it, honey? What? The janitor impatiently interrogated. Don't build a fire in the backyard this Sunday. Don't burn the old boards. It could all end very badly. Fire a lot of fire. As if in a trance, said the little girl. Instead of gratitude, the janitor abruptly yanked his palm from her hand and spat over his shoulder 3 times. The witch. I thought she'd say something nice to me. Well, get out of here, witch. The older man swung a broom at the little girl, but she was long gone. On the way to the orphanage, Eva cried incessantly. The 7-year-old girl could not understand why. When she tries to help people or tell them the truth, she is invariably threatened with beatings and other terrible things. Just in case, Eva still told all her classmates and a few kindergarten teachers about the impending fire, and even risked going into the principal office to warn her about it. Make sure you have plenty of water. Jacqueline Jones pronounced the girl on Sunday. It's going to be very hot in here. We've got to get everything ready before the fire department gets here, so they can put it out easier. What kind of talk is that? The principal squinted her eyes through her big square glasses. It's your witch business again. I told you, Eva, stop scaring people. That's your business, she said quietly, girl, but I won't go to bed on Sunday. I don't want to be burnt alive. With these words, she quietly left the office, closing the door behind her. The girl did not listen to what Jacqueline was shouting at her back, and frankly, she didn't care anymore. Everything Eva was thinking about now had to do with how to survive the night of a future fire. But no matter how angry and scolded the principal was, everything happened exactly as the fortune teller's daughter had said it would. On Sunday night, Charlie's grandfather was going to build a fire from old planks, because the weather allowed it, and the children were all asleep in their beds, so they could not breathe in the stench of the wood. However, as soon as the old man poured the prepared boards with the liquid for kindling, a very strong gust of wind suddenly blew, and the liquid involuntarily fell on the dry leaves. The grass and leaves instantly caught fire, dedicating orange flowers. Fiery flashed in the janitor's face. He only had time to open his mouth in amazement and immediately rush for water in the back room, while the flames under powerful wind gusts began to rapidly approach the walls of the shelter. Get up! Get up! Burn! Burn! Eva shouted, who, as promised, did not sleep, but crept quietly to the window, where she could see what was happening. The children and caregivers did not want to get up at first. They thought, perhaps, that she was being weird again. But when it became as bright as daylight outside the window and the fire was coming up to the first-floor window, that's when everyone became sharply uncomfortable with jokes. Firemen, quickly, the principal commanded, jumping out of her room in a robe and slippers. She had no family, so the woman lived directly in the orphanage in a separate wing, resembling a small apartment. When she saw Ava helping all the other kids carry a bucket of water from the toilet, Jacqueline jumped up as if she were off her chain, rudely snatched the bucket from her and poured ice, cold water over the child. "You," said the principal in a trembling voice. "You set this up, didn't you? You wanted to burn us, you little bitch." Jacqueline Jones, what do you think you're doing? Nurse Olya, who was dumbfounded by this action, stood up for the girl. She will catch pneumonia, and then Eva did nothing wrong. On the contrary, and time warned us. Shut up, Olya. You don't understand anything. That little witch knew in advance that the fire would start. You see, she told me about it on Friday, and you didn't do anything. The young female employees were surprised. Who, then, do you propose to blame? Jacqueline poked at her so viciously that at that moment Eve was willing to bet on anything. This woman could curse or jinx anyone herself. So scary was her mad look. Fireman, who appeared in the corridor, gently pushed Eva away and then shouted behind him, evidently to his partner because there were 3 others. "Help them out." While they argued, the specialists arrived on the scene and were engaged in extinguishing the fire. Along the way, they evacuated all the orphanage residents in the building. "Our conversation is not over," threateningly asserted the principal as they found themselves outside. "Know this, Eva. From this day forward, nothing good awaits you in my orphanage. I promise you that you will never go to a new family. Do you hear me, you bastard?" Jacqueline didn't hesitate to spit over her left shoulder 3 times, and then she went to the other kids, proudly straightening her back and sticking out her chin, which was as square as her glasses. Eva stood in the middle of a yard full of lonely children like herself and silently swallowed her tears. She was terribly hurt that she was hated so much. Those who were supposed to help her and protect her from all evil and injustice. The world once again showed the girl its harsh face. But now Eva was more certain than ever that no matter what happened to her next, she would still use her gift. After all, today it had helped her save their entire orphanage. And what would have happened if she had ignored her vision? That was something the Fortunato's daughter preferred not to think about. Ironically, after this incident, many of the boys respected Eva. They believed in her gift and were very grateful to the little girl for what she was so timely woke them up. But Jacqueline Jones was still wary of trusting Eva's abilities and only silently hated her. The spiteful principal kept her promise, did her best to ensure that no one would adopt the girl. She believed that the longer Eva was an orphan, the better. Maybe all the goddamn mysticism would get out of her head. Under mental health, she even wanted to put some kind of psychiatric diagnosis on her. But the doctor she summoned to examine Eva found no such thing. Oh, for God's sake. The child psychiatrist shook his head reproachfully. Do you really intend to ruin the poor child's whole life because of your contrived fears? And how will she go on living when he graduated from your orphanage? She cannot get any normal job with such a diagnosis, can she? No, you don't even talk me into it. I don't know about you, but I intend to continue to be a human being. After these words, the doctor gathered all his papers and instruments and left the director's office. Jacqueline almost chipped her teeth in anger. Today is your lucky day, witch, but don't expect it to change anything for you. I'm not backing down from mine. I don't doubt it, Jacqueline Jones. The girl answered calmly, too. God is your judge. When Eva turned 16 and it was time to leave the walls of the orphanage, the young girl was already confidently guessing with her hand and was able to see through a person's soul. It was just as her mother had once told her, promising that the girl's gift would develop over time and become as strong as hers. All this time, Eva often guessed the simple bystanders when she managed to escape from the orphanage for a short time. In this way, the girl earned for herself and her friends candy. However, almost every time it was worth bringing real money to the orphanage, it was immediately taken away by the principal. You have no right, told her Eva, who was no longer afraid of Jacqueline. I earned that money honestly. They are my honest money. Money can never be honest. The honest ones are the poor people you deceive by passing off their desires as possible reality. What do you care? Eva continued to be indignant. You'll just put it in your pocket and teach us how to live anyway, as if nothing had happened. The principal gritted her teeth and said nothing, but she was in no hurry to return the money. During the long years of her stay in the orphanage, Eva had already got used to the hypocrisy and unreasonable hatred on the part of this woman. So she was not even surprised when, upon her release from the orphanage, she found that Jacqueline Jones had done everything in her power to get Eva the worst apartment. "Hello, sweet home," the girl said thoughtfully, looking around her new home. Eva dragged her small suitcase into the apartment and looked around. It was a tiny one, bedroom on the top floor of an old 9-story building, and the elevator hadn't worked for a long time. The ceiling of the room was leaking because the roof was always under the fuel of snow and spring-summer rains. The house had not seen an overhaul in maybe 20 years, so Eva anticipated the coming winter to be a living hell in her apartment. But she accepted the new challenge of her fate with dignity. Her mother had told her long ago that in this life she had to learn one very important skill: patience. The girl pulled out of her bag her old laptop. Eva had honestly won it during one of the regional chess tournaments. Eva did not know where she got that skill, but the students from another orphanage against whom they competed, Eva, as they say, cut them apart like nuts. The girl went to her blog, which she kept just as her mother used to do it. Eva also learned the basics of numerology and divination of tarot cards, and often took orders through her page and social networks, and thus earned her living. But she wasn't going to the train station. It really was better to go to the station. Another 3 years passed, and then, glancing at the message one day, the girl saw another order. This time a young businessman wanted to meet her. His name was Ethan, and they made an appointment. Eva went to the city park. That was where the customer's car was supposed to be waiting for her, and with it, a new experience, romance. Arriving at the place, the young fortune-teller was surprised. The car was clearly a premium, and there were 2 security guards in black suits and the same black glasses. "Wow, it's just like in the movies," thought Eva, who herself had arrived at the meeting in the most casual of clothes. She had never used extravagant mystical props to create a spectacular image. On the contrary, she was a little flattered to think that outwardly she was no different from other people, while inside she had truly amazing powers. "Are you Eva?" asked her one of the guards when she was sure that this was the car in which the customer was waiting for her. "Yes," she nodded. "Good. The warden is waiting for you inside." The man answered calmly and opened the door in front of her. Once inside, Eva saw an attractive-looking young man who looked no more than 24 or 25. "So you are the fortune-teller Eva Smith, about whom as many as 30,000 subscribers speak with admiration?" Smiling, the young businessman asked. He was clearly intrigued by the fact that his expectations about Eva did not seem to match reality at all. Eva, however, though she liked this Ethan, was in the mood for work, not for flirting. "What is it? What exactly would you like to know?" I decided to get right to the point. "Young lady, you're not in the mood for easy conversation," he said a little disappointedly, and then held out his palm. "I need to know if it's worth making a deal with a big company. They promised us a good percentage of sales, and if we bail them out with a few shipments, I want to be sure it's worth the risk." "Understood," Eva nodded and began to examine her client's palm closely. A second later, she discerned inside the bundle of lines below his little finger, cheating and big money. Then a short but eloquent introductory picture was revealed to her. Ethan was tearing and swearing in his office, spreading papers across the table. On one of the sheets of paper was clearly read the name of the firm the businessman had just told her about. "No, you should not get involved with them. She simply answered and looked up at the businessman. They will cheat you hard, and then you will not be glad that you gave them your goods without a guarantee. Ethan shook his head in frustration. I knew it, said the young man. Then he took some bills out of his pocket and handed them to Vera. Why so much? She said no. We agreed on a different amount. Believe me, I'd rather pay you for a truthful prediction than those damn analysts from the department who were foaming at the mouth all morning yesterday, proving that there are no risks on this deal and there can't be. Eva, seeing how genuinely worried this young man was about his cause, smiled warmly, but took from the whole wad of money only the amount that was originally intended for her. Don't worry so much, she said. These companions have cheated people more than once, but soon their fraud will be over. You'll see. In 3 months, there will be a big investigation about them in all the newspapers. Ethan looked at her with genuine admiration. How great it must be to be able to see the future, he said thoughtfully. More like responsible. And it's also scary sometimes because you never know what you might see. Eva answered him with a shrug. She was about to get out of the car when the businessman suddenly touched her shoulder lightly with his arm. Eva, wait. The girl froze. She didn't know what would follow. Ethan, on the other hand, looked very embarrassed and excited at the same time. His voice trembled as he continued. Let me give you a ride home. Keep me company, please. The fortune-teller turned around and then looked the businessman straight in the eyes. Bravery, intelligence, compassion, a pure heart. That's what Eva saw in his soul. Slightly relaxed. She replied politely, All right, thank you. Just to warn you, you've probably never seen a neighborhood like the one I live in. Here, give me a tour. Ethan laughed lightly, after which she gave him her address, and the luxury car drove off smoothly. As they talked, they found that they had much in common in terms of their hobbies and their view of the world in general. As it turned out, Ethan had recently started working in one of the branches of his father's company. So he decided to take precautionary measures with the help of a fortune-teller. How on earth did you decide to take such a step? Eva asked him with interest. People do not like it, although they read horoscopes with pleasure, thinking that all the truth is written there. Ethan only smirked slightly. Eva, you just don't know what passions really go on behind the scenes of big business. There, people are not only willing to believe in horoscopes, but they don't put a number in the contract. If the wrong put a number in the contract, if the wrong phase of the moon is in the sky during that period of time. Eva laughed sincerely. Ethan continued. Besides, I heard about you a long time ago from my co-workers. They highly recommended you. Audience, what can I say? Ethan smiled, and Eva felt her heart warm. This guy seemed so kind and sincere, and he had a good, strong heart too. That meant Ethan could be trusted. Eva, to be honest, really wanted to. When the businessman brought the girl to her house, he could hardly contain an amazed sigh. So you really live in this? The young man could not find the words to describe all the grandeur of the old 9-story building. You mean in this hole? Finished for him, Eva? It's okay if you don't look too closely. It's not a bad house. Ethan looked at her with understanding and sincere sympathy. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you, he said, and quickly lowered his eyes, but raised them a moment later to ask, Tell me, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? I don't think we're done talking about lunar phases. Eva smiled with all the tenderness of which her heart, scarred by hardship and loss, was capable, and agreed. So Ethan and Eva started dating. Soon the young people realized that the feeling between them was much deeper than mere sympathy. Ethan realized that he loved Eva very much, and that her feelings for him were just as mutual. The boy's parents, of course, were not thrilled when he told them about his fiancée, but Ethan was very independent, and had been making all the decisions about his personal life himself for a long time. He warned them that he wanted to invite Eva to a family dinner, and they reluctantly agreed. After all, they wondered who the bride was. Did the son's fortune teller show up? No. Ethan, let's not do that yet. Unprepared for the meeting, Eva dissuaded the businessman. For the past few days, she had felt a bad feeling growing inside her, not so much excitement. Eva felt in her gut that she should not go to her fiancé's parents. Come on, honey, no one would eat you there, Ethan insisted. And then, how are you going to marry me if you're not ready to go and talk to my mother and father? It took me a long time to get them to meet me. And now you're almost having to force me to go. I'll just resent all of you. Eva loved him too much to watch him stand in the middle of her little room, burning with nerves and insecurity. All right, persuaded, agreed. After all, the girl. Did you tell them what I do? Of course, the lad cheerfully responded. And how did they feel about that? She asked cautiously. The groom hugged Eva and rolled his eyes slightly. Well, Daddy exhaled noisily. He seemed fine. He was even interested. I mean, Mom, she's much more conservative, but I think you'll get along with her. Eva kissed Ethan tenderly instead of answering. I really hope that's how it goes, she whispered. The evening dinner went according to the standard scenario. First appetizers and hot food, then dessert, light wine. Jessica Brown, Ethan's mother, glared at her guests the entire evening, and there was nothing she could do about it. She didn't like Eva at all, especially the fact that she was doing some mystical nonsense for money. Eva, honey, haven't you tried to get yourself a real job? With a slight snobbishness in her voice, said the woman. And what is fortune-telling? Card reading, not a job. Question to question, the bride answered her. I can help people and do only what is required of me in a particular situation. I have never deceived anyone. Jessica, people who grew up in an orphanage in general have this characteristic. They try not to hurt other people because they had a hard time at the orphanage. So you're still from the orphanage? The mistress of the house presented me with a glass of wine and looked eloquently at her son. Well, that's nice. Jessica took a big sip, and Eva pressed her lips together. But something about the boy's father looked at her reproachfully. The girl has such a gift. That's great. She saved my son's business, too. Now he would be sorry if he had signed a contract with those manufacturers. The wife only nodded disapprovingly, and the husband, trying to defuse the situation, looked attentively at the girl. Suddenly it seemed to him that something in her appearance seemed awfully familiar. Only what it was he did not understand, nor did he understand why he, unlike his wife, was so attracted to this whole magical subject. Ava, excuse me, have we met anywhere? Looking hopefully at the guest, the elderly businessman asked. No, really. Eve smiled politely. Would you then do me the courtesy of telling me? Please see what is in store for me in the near future. Smiling good-naturedly, the man asked, Not that I believe in any of this, but I just wonder how it works at all. The landlord hoped to turn the unpleasant situation with his wife into a joke, thereby finally defusing the tense situation at the table. Okay, she agreed. Give me your hand. The man obeyed obediently, and Eva began to peer into the lines of his fate. Suddenly she was seething with boiling water. Eva jumped up from the table, throwing Ethan's father's hand away from her as if it were a poisonous snake. The fortune teller went into genuine shock, and bitter rivers of tears poured from her eyes. Eva, what happened? Ethan shrieked excitedly. Did you see something? The young man wanted to hug his fiancée, but she pushed him away. Leave me alone, she cried out. All of you, leave me alone. Later, Eva jumped out of the living room and ran out of the businessman's house like an arrow, leaving them completely confused. I told you she was crazy, and you told me she had a gift. She had a gift? You don't understand anything. Jessica waved her hands theatrically, but now everyone and everything about her was clear. My husband was sitting in his chair, completely stunned by what had happened. Ethan rushed after Eva, but there was no sign of her. Then the young man pulled out his phone and dialed his fiancée. The mechanical voice of the answering machine told him that she was not online. What the hell, Ethan cursed to himself, not wasting a minute, went to the apartment to Eva. But when he got there, it turned out that the door was locked and no one was inside. Next to the court mat, the boy found a note written in the hand of his fiancée. "We can't be together anymore. Ethan, sorry, don't look for me. You're Eva." After reading the words that wounded him like a knife in the heart, Ethan sat painfully slowly on the floor in front of his beloved's apartment. He had no idea what was going on, but all he knew was that it had something to do with his family. Eva, what have you done?" he said, banging his head aimlessly against her door. "If you only knew how much I love you, Eva." The girl, meanwhile, was hiding out in one of the city's hostels. She did not know what to do now, but she was absolutely sure of only one thing. What she had learned tonight had changed her life forever. However, Eva did not enjoy her loneliness as much as she wanted to. To her great surprise, the girl was found not by anyone, but by the father of the groom himself. "Eva, stop running, please," said the businessman. "You gave us all a serious scare the other day. Tell me, what did you see on my hand? Maybe I'm sick or about to go bankrupt." "Don't think so. I've already told you that I don't believe in all that magical nonsense. But obviously, what do you believe? You have played such a dark trick on me." The girl shook like an aspen leaf and let the businessman into her singles room. And then, unable to hold back her tears, she uttered, "Andy Miller, I saw on your palm the so-called kinship connection. You and I are related because you are my father." The girl picked herself up with her arms and shook herself finally into sobs. "I can't believe I sat at the same table as my father," Eva continued. "You left my mother pregnant. Is that what she went through when you were gone?" Wait, Eva, not understanding anything, put her on the couch by the businessman. "What do you mean I was gone? And how could I know your mother?" The girl, continuing to sob, told him about what she had once told her fortune-teller Bella. "My mother would never lie to me, I know." Eva finished her story. "And you? How could you do this to her, to me? Don't you have any heart at all? My mother said your parents were very cruel. But you were different. But I guess Mummy was wrong, and you're just as much of a monster as your father and your mother." Eva was crying, and Andy Miller sat beside her, utterly confused. How could he be this girl's father if he couldn't even remember her mother? On the other hand, there was always some understatement in his life. This was due to the fact that the businessman could not partially remember his past childhood, his youth. But his youth, from about 20 years of age, was a black hole. His parents then had a hard time getting him out. So severe was the head injury he had sustained in some bizarre attack. Everything he knew of those years, he reconstructed only with the help of his relatives, piece by piece, collecting his own memory. Yet not a single vivid memory, a testimony, a bruise that they had actually told him the truth. Andy, alas, could not remember. The intrigued businessman scrutinized Eva's facial features one more time before uttering, "Well, let's have a DNA test, and if I really am your father, I won't give you up. See, that's why I asked you if we'd met somewhere before. Your face is so familiar and foreign at the same time. It's hard for me to explain, but I really don't remember your mother. I'm sorry." Eva agreed. After all, she had nothing to hide, and she had never lied about what she saw in someone else's hand. The test showed a perfect match. Andy couldn't believe his eyes, but that meant that you and Ethan were brother and sister. Horrified, he asked Eva, but she shook her head in the negative, to his great relief. Calm down, Andy. I don't feel any kinship on Ethan's part. What's more, he's not even my half-brother, lost in the depths of my own past. The businessman appeared completely discouraged. It was clear that his parents had simply lied, thereby depriving him of his only love and native daughter. But how could they do this to him? Gradually he remembered both Bella and how happy they had been with her, and even how he had once worked as a waiter. Fortunately for him, there was still one person in the world who could help him uncover this family conspiracy. And that person, oddly enough, was his own wife. When Andy arrived home, he immediately summoned his wife to his office and locked the door. "Jessica, I know everything." The businessman started right away. "Tell me the truth. You came into my life almost as soon as I recovered from the trauma. How much what? Is he my son or not?" Jessica realized she'd been caught off guard. She burst into tears in front of her husband and immediately repented. "I'm sorry, Andy. Yeah, Ethan's not your son. I was so desperate back then. My fiancé left me when he found out I was pregnant and went straight to Bali. And my dad, who was also a fisherman, said it was such a shame. I had to get married right away, or go out with my things." Jessica sobbed into her handkerchief. After she had calmed down a little, she continued, "And then your parents showed up on the horizon and nursed you back to health like a baby. They gave you all sorts of drugs so that you could recover your memory, as they said. I wasn't really interested at the time what it was about, but they brought some specialists to you. Apparently they wanted to make some major adjustments in your brain." Andy listened to his wife and felt a cold sweat roll down his back. Ava, his daughter, was right. Father and mother were real monsters. If they wanted to cut his life out of his memory so rudely, but they said to me, "If you want to get out of this beautiful life without shame, then pretend that you were his fiancée and pregnant by him. You couldn't seem to remember anything like that, so you took everything at face value, but it was the only way for me to save my reputation. Andy, I'm sorry." Andy looked hard at his wife, thought for a while, and then sighed. "What's there to fist? Bump now, after all this time. My parents are both dead now, and only the highest court can give them justice. I love Ethan too. He's my son, except not by blood." When the deception was exposed, alas, nothing could be changed. The businessman forgave both his wife and his late parents, although the latter was particularly hard for him. Andy himself had long ago found out that Frank's competitors had tried to kill him. They thought that by depriving him of his son, they would make the businessman less stubborn. Instead, however, Andy fell into a so-called memory trap for many years, where half of his memories were, in fact, artificially simulated by family members. After learning from his daughter where Bella's grave was, Andy went there and wept and asked his beloved for forgiveness. "I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. Bella," he said, stroking the monument, "I always loved you and I always will. At least you left me your image in my daughter. Thank you, Bella. Thank you for Eve and Eve and the love you gave me for so many years, first on earth and then in heaven." Ethan and Eva are getting ready to get married. Ethan, after his father's fiancée's explanation, was quite shocked by the whole story, but nevertheless accepted it. After all, his parents had always loved him, and their past was their business, in which he had no moral right to pry, much less judge any of them. Eva was finally happy after so many years of trying. The girl had found a family after the wedding. Eva planned to study to become a psychologist. To be a fortune teller is certainly good, but psychology has always interested her too, and she very much hopes to be able to help people on an even deeper level, combining both formal science and her gift. Thank you for watching to the end.